Hey guys, welcome back to the latest episode of the Growing Your Dental Practice podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hennon from Patient Boost. In today's episode, I'm joined by Matt Hadman, Business Development Manager at Patient Plan Direct, the UK's leading dental plan provider offering cost-effective dental plan administration with a personal service. Welcome to the show, Matt. Thanks for joining me today. How are you?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I'm all good. Thank you very much. Having a great week. So we've been inducting another member to our business development team this week. So just nice. We're getting a few more feet on the ground for us from a field point of view. And just very busy. You know, the profession have got lots of questions for us at the minute. So definitely keeping us on our toes, but all good. Thank you.
Brilliant, fantastic. How many people are in the business development team then?
So we're a much leaner or much smaller team than you might imagine. So there's 6 of us in the business development team in total, and then obviously we have various support functions in our head offices and dotted about the country. But there's 6 of us predominantly that are client facing, if you like.
Fantastic, that's awesome. So for listeners, you may have realised that Matt isn't the first person from Patient Plan Direct to be on the show. So we've actually spoken to your MD, Simon Reynolds, and that was a great episode. And obviously we focused a lot on kind of the patient plan and the membership plans for patients. This is a slightly different twist. So it's more focusing on, one of the biggest topics right now in dentistry, or especially UK dentistry, is the crisis in the NHS and the exodus of NHS dentists over to private. And everyone's kind of asking the question, right? How do I make that transition? How do I convert NHS patients into private? And I think Simon basically suggested it'd be great to get you on that to talk about what you've learned from in practice, and we can talk about the fact that you've got experience inside the practice, and also now you also work with practices every day to try and implement the plan, and you help them kind of make that transition. So this is going to be a cracking one, very on topic, and I'm very excited. So before we do anything too technical, let's talk more about you, Matt. What's your background? Because you've obviously got a background in dentistry.
Yeah, I have. So, I mean, my background really primarily was in the wider NHS. So I worked in other primary care services for the best part of a decade, mostly in a managerial capacity. So I was leading teams within primary care, and obviously having a lot of dealings with the CQC that were just really starting to emerge, back in 2010, 2011. And then I decided that, maybe staying in the NHS just wasn't for me. I wasn't really cut out for the shift work that it involved, if I'm honest. So I was just not one of these people that could ever adapt to working nights and back to days and back to nights. It just didn't work for me. So I sort of put my CV out online, had a bit of a feel around, obviously was just from a financial position was probably quite comfortable, in the NHS, the salary was quite good. And I wasn't really sure what I would be able to do if I was going to do anything. And sort of as fate had it, it just happened that somebody saw my CV online, called me up, said, would I be interested in working in dentistry? I was like, look, let's have a conversation, but I don't know anything about dentistry, so I don't know, whether we'll be compatible. And what came out of that was they needed somebody who had strong people management skills to really help lead what was a very forward-thinking dental practice. And actually, the business owners wanted somebody who understood compliance because they didn't really understand the CQC. The CQC aren't that heavily involved in dentistry. They only rock up once every few years, as opposed to in the NHS, they appear once every 12 months. So, I was much more familiar. So we sort of had these sort of cross-transferable skills, if you like. I went into practice and I managed that practice for a few years. And then the owners, as part of their exit strategy, decided to sell. And it just sort of felt right that if I was going to move away from practice life, then now was the opportunity to do it. We were a big plan practice, and we were a major customer of another plan provider. And so I sort of migrated from practice to go and work with the plan provider that had been administering our plans in practice. And again, I was with them for sort of 3 years, and it got to the pandemic. And from a plan point of view, everything sort of came to a halt. So yes, plan patients were very loyal to the practice. But for us as field team members, we were really just sat about doing very little because practices were shut for several months. And when they opened, they opened under such limited capacity. Plan was just not a priority. And well, as you probably guess, I can talk the hind leg off a donkey. So I need to be around people. And I just couldn't really get used to being at home. I'd been at home for a whole year. That wasn't what I was used to. I was used to being on the road, being in practice. And so I took an opportunity when I was approached to go and run a very large sort of advanced dental practice that had a very big NHS contract. We're talking 40,000 UDAs, £1 million contract. But on top of that, we're turning over, about £2 million a year in private income. So they were really, really busy, really big. I went in there for 12 months. And to be honest, I would have probably happily stayed there had this agency not called me up and said, are you still working in the plan arena? No, I'm not. Well, we've got a job with another plan provider. And the rest is history. I came to Patient Plan Direct and here I am. I mean, as you can probably gather from my background in dentistry, plan has been a big part of my dental career. So it's sort of what I'm passionate about. It's what I know, it's what I enjoy, it's what I truly believe is right for both dentist and the patient. So to be in the plan arena is definitely my comfort zone. It's where I want to be.
Fantastic. That's awesome. I love the fact that you did the stint as a practice manager, and then you sort of got lured. Obviously, I guess there was the selling. Obviously, the selling of the practice. I guess that had an impact on the decision. But then you joined a plan provider, jumped out of the plan arena, and then back into it. Which I think is great because you've got very fresh knowledge of inside a practice, which is great.
And I think what was really nice now looking back on it was great to go back into practice during the pandemic, because I can really relate, at grassroots level to how people were actually feeling with the ongoing changes of COVID restrictions and requirements for cross-infection and, managing teams where you were having to self-isolate for, 10 days with lateral flow testing twice a week, all those challenges that it threw at you. I think it's very hard to actually have true empathy for unless you've really been there and had to deal with it. And, I do like managing people. So that might sound a bit odd because actually managing people is quite a stressful role.
Absolutely.
But I quite like that firefighting. So I like the idea that I have to really be on my toes and be very reactive to dealing with stuff day in, day out. So, it was just a really nice thing for me to be able to do during the pandemic. I feel like it was a good career move for me, really.
Fantastic. That's awesome. So what did you enjoy most about being a practice manager? Obviously the people element is I guess quite a large part of that.
Yeah, so people management for me is absolutely what makes me tick. And I think the only reason that I'm suited to a role outside of directly managing people is that from a plan provider point of view, you are very influential to the practice teams that you work with in terms of getting them motivated, training them, keeping them on board, keeping that momentum moving. So, yeah, from a practice management point of view, it would have to be people management, and it has to just be that I am naturally just drawn to that caring element of work. So, like I say, I've always worked within healthcare. I've worked within the wider NHS for several years before coming into dentistry. So I think, I'm just naturally tuned to wanting to look after people. And, dentistry, like much of the rest of healthcare, is really, that's what it's all about, isn't it? That's what we come into it for, because we want to do the right thing by the general public.
Absolutely. No, that's brilliant. And so what would you say some of the biggest challenges were when you were a practice manager? Would you say people as well, again, at both sides?
Yeah, so I think within dentistry especially, which I've always found very surprising, a patient's expectations within dentistry are often very different to what you can really deliver. And I can remember having some very difficult conversations with patients about what they were wanting was not something that was really very achievable. And actually, if it was going to be achievable, it was probably more detrimental to get there than it was to leave them as they are. I can remember one guy coming in basically wanting full mouth crowns because he didn't have the patience to go through 18 months of orthodontic treatment. And there was nothing wrong with his teeth. And, you're saying to him, what do you want to do this for? And it was literally because he wanted it done tomorrow, not in a year's time. And it's having to then say to somebody, look, this isn't for us. We've got to walk away from this. I think they're quite difficult conversations. And actually, you don't have that really in wider healthcare, because people are only presenting to you, in a hospital setting with a genuine problem that you have got to resolve. They were probably some of my biggest challenges, managing patient expectations, and managing team members. I mean, managing a team is hard, especially if you have somebody where you're getting divides in the team, or somebody isn't pulling their weight and that brings other people down. You have to be that person as a leader, don't you, that injects positivity even into the most negative situations. That is definitely challenging sometimes, because on a personal level, you probably just want to get hold of somebody and shake them and say, what the hell are you doing? And you can't do that.
You can't do that. No, well, not anymore anyway.
No.
Excellent. I love that. And so you did the 3 years at your first practice.
Yeah.
And obviously the owners exited. Would you have moved to the plan, the provider, had that not happened, or were they trying to lure you away from the practice before that happened?
No, so I honestly can say that if that hadn't sold, I don't think I would have left. I was very happy where I was. I had a good relationship with the practice owners. I had a great team around me that, we'd really got settled over that 3 years that I'd been there. I definitely don't think I would have come away. I think that at the time, I didn't really want to move from independent practice. So the practice was sold to a corporate. And I just felt like that wasn't going to be for me, because actually a corporate manager is a much more controlled animal than the autonomy that an independent practice manager has. And I just felt like I probably couldn't make that move from having autonomy and control over really leading the business to moving into a hierarchy of there's lots of boxes you have to tick before you can do something. So it just felt like naturally the right time to make that move, and it was just that I called the person that looked after us from our current plan provider and said, if you hear of any manager roles coming up in independent practice, will you let me know? And she said to me, well, actually, we're looking for somebody to come and work with us, and why don't you reach out? And sometimes you just feel like fate has a way of, the universe has a way of looking after you, doesn't it? And things happen for a reason.
Oh no, brilliant! Fantastic. So it wasn't even like they were thinking about you and you were thinking about them. It was more of a case of reaching out to them for a little bit of help to get somewhere else, and they're actually, we know each other quite well. You understand our product really well. Like let's make this happen. Yeah, fantastic.
Just exactly like that. I had no idea that they would be looking for somebody, and that that I would even fit that criteria. It was just a case of, well, actually, the person that looked after us was looking after 100 other practices within that locality. So if anybody was going to know about a manager role coming up and could really endorse me, it was going to be her. And that was how the conversation started. And then, like I say, I ended up going to work for them rather than them finding me another role somewhere else.
Fantastic. That's awesome. And weird things like that happen all the time. I got a job randomly through, I was a software. It was a software product, and I used their software in my dad's business. And I reached out to them when I wasn't sure I wanted to start my dad's business, and they were like, "Actually, you've been on our target." Like almost like they had me written down as like someone they wanted to approach in the future, and it was like weird that I was approaching them, and it was like, "Oh, this is weird."
Yeah.
Didn't last very long. I'll put that out, but it can happen.
Yeah,
it lasted a month.
Yeah, not very long at all. No, mine lasted slightly longer than that.
A bit longer than that. That's awesome. So you went back into practice for a year at the Advanced Centre, and then obviously the recruiters came knocking and said, "I've got another position for you." Obviously, patient plan direct. And how did that come about? So were you excited by that prospect? Was it the right time, or did you have to get kind of coaxed in?
I wasn't looking for a job, and actually the recruitment agency that called me had got my CV from when I decided that I was probably going to look to move away from the plan arena during the pandemic. So they'd had it for sort of 12 months. And my phone rang, and actually I didn't know who it was. And so they're lucky that I even answered it, really. And I just we ended up in this conversation, and it was like, oh, would you be interested? Well, if anything was going to lure me away from practice, it was only going to be going back into the plan arena. I wasn't going to be doing anything else. And so it just felt right, because it was like, you know what? There's only a handful of plan providers out there. I could count on a few fingers the ones that I would really choose to work for. And it just happened that one of those people that I would have considered were now looking for a role, and that the role was for the Midlands. I was right slap bang in the middle of the area they were looking to recruit for. And again, it's just funny how things come about. Like I could have hunted for months for a role like that, and one would probably not have existed. And then without trying, it almost lands on your lap.
Fantastic. So how long have you been at Patient Plan Direct?
I've been here for 8 months now. So I joined, at the start of the year, March. Yeah, so 8 months. Yeah.
Fantastic. And how has the experience been so far?
Yeah, fantastic, actually. So probably much better than I could even imagine myself. So I guess, having worked for another plan provider, I guess you are always hesitant about, should I go and work for a competitor? I definitely wouldn't have done that. I definitely wouldn't have moved directly from one provider to another, because I just feel that would have been very disjointed, very messy for me, the people that I'd been working with, all of that. But because I'd had sort of over 12 months, nearly 18 months out of the plan arena at the point that I came back in, it felt like the right thing to do. I guess my initial reservations probably were that other people would have led you to believe that Patient Plan Direct was this really low cost, no frills, absolutely budget bottom line plan provider, and you were going to get very little from it. And actually, when you get in and you understand how we work with our clients and the services that we offer and the wider value add that we give, that absolutely isn't true. And it's definitely a misconception that other plan providers have of us. The business have invested a lot of money into technology to really get us at an industry leading level. And I just think, if those people are still saying that same thing that they were saying when I was, in the plan arena before, then, they're misinformed now, really, because we're definitely much further ahead than we perhaps were 4 or 5 years ago.
Absolutely. And when I spoke to Simon, it did sound like, you are slightly smaller than, some of the other providers, but you're definitely sort of punching above your weight with the sort of the service delivered. So that's awesome, man. So love that. We've got a full history of your career and background now. It's really good, and obviously sets you up really well to like deliver the next kind of section of the podcast, which is all the hopefully some really useful value. So what are the kind of major challenges and trends facing dentistry right now?
So I think the elephant in the room is probably the NHS, isn't it? In that talking about us as a business, we have PPD have built their business based on competitor acquisition. So, it's been about somebody's got an existing plan list with another provider. They want to save some money on their admin fees. They moved to us. I would say that across 2022, through no direct intention of our own, that has not been the way we've grown the business. We've grown the business through NHS conversions, through dentists saying to us, this, either existing clients or new people approaching us, that the NHS is just no longer sustainable for them in their practice, and they need help in a way to replace income on a private basis to do that. I mean, 12 months ago, 10 years ago, people were saying that the NHS dentistry was dying. I would say 2022 probably says NHS dentistry has died and moved to resus and is very close to becoming totally extinct. Does something not happen very, very quickly? And I think the way the profession has made that mass move away from the NHS really demonstrates that we're not just talking about one or two, we're talking about hundreds of dentists, moving away, hemorrhaging away from the NHS because they can't make it work. So I think that's a massive challenge. And that then leads on into this other challenge of how do we increase our private income? Because if we've been an NHS practice, or if we've been a mixed practice who's dabbled in private dentistry but not done too much with it and just accepted it as it's naturally landed, how now do we become this machine that delivers dentistry privately, and how do we earn money in an independent mechanism, and that brings about its own challenges, because that's more about having to sit down with people and business plan and rethink where you want to take the business. And the NHS sets dentists up to almost believe they need to be all things to all people, because you just need to take whatever comes your way. And actually, when you go into private dentistry, that's absolutely not what you want to be doing. You need to decide, who is the customer I want to attract? What is my niche? What are my USPs? And all of a sudden, you're narrowing everything down. So it's almost going right back to the beginning of your career and having to start all over again, in terms of establishing yourself in a very different business model.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, it's. I wouldn't say it's the elephant in the room. It literally is. It's just everything, isn't it? It's like it's the most talked about thing right now. And so obviously you've got. I'm hoping that you've got some wisdom and some stuff you can talk about, like how obviously the plans can help with that conversion. Before we get to that though, what type of practice was your first practice? Was it mixed, private,
It was
NHS?
fully private. So it
Fully
had
private.
had an NHS contract historically, but it had given up its NHS contract at the last contract change, well, shortly after. So you're talking 2006, 2008-ish. So it had been a long established, and bear in mind, that had been an NHS practice for sort of in excess of 30 years. And the owner that I went to work for, he had actually gone into that practice as a foundation dentist, in his first NHS year. So, even back then, those dentists were still facing the same challenges, really, that, they had to go through that process of, how do we turn a long-standing NHS practice with a good reputation into a private practice, without damaging our income.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the changeover is that fully happened by the time you joined the practice?
Yeah, it had fully occurred.
Yeah.
So yeah, we then had a large plan base, because even then they had used plan as a way that we would now, to replace that income and keep patient loyalty and give stability to the diary. So yeah, the overall model of what would you do in an NHS conversion hasn't changed in 20 years. It's just a case of there might be little tweaks and bits and pieces you do slightly differently, but the overall outcome will be the same.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that case, it's obviously a slightly different conversation, because obviously that practice at the time was fully private. Obviously, you were still getting maybe inquiries from NHS patients.
Mm-hmm.
How would you and the team handle those inquiries?
So this is something that I still talk about in a lot of training sessions that I do with practices, not just that are converting, but even with fully private practices, because for me, it was a big thing. So it's about how you handle that inquiry. So, really good example is a patient calls you this morning, and the first thing they do when you answer the phone, are you taking NHS patients? Well, you can do, if you want to, exactly what everybody else is doing. And that is say, no, sorry, we're not. We're at capacity. We only see people privately, or we'll add you to a waiting list, but you could be on it for over 3 years. If you do that, what the point that I'm getting to is, you're going to do what the 25 other practices have done this morning to that patient before that patient's called you. It's very unlikely somebody making an NHS inquiry is making it as a one-off. They've probably sat down for a couple of hours and gone on NHS choices and just thought, I'm going to ring every practice. I'm going to get somewhere eventually. Now, we all know within the profession, they're not going to get anywhere however long they ring, because nobody is accepting new NHS patients. So you can do that and just get them off the phone and wait for the phone to ring for a private inquiry. Or you can set yourself apart and you can do what we were doing when I was in practice and what I encourage my clients to do. And that is take control of that conversation and make that patient feel valued. So the first thing I would always do is say, take back control of that conversation. So I would just say straight away, before I even get into the NHS, sorry, my name's Matt. I didn't catch your name. What was it? And they'll give you it. And then you can go into, okay, Matt, so you were calling looking for an NHS space. Just tell me what's caused you to ring today. Have you got a problem? What are you looking for? Let that patient talk, because if you can give them 5 minutes of airtime, you've just done what no other practice has done this morning. And all of a sudden, that patient feels valued. And then you can have that conversation around, Matt, you've probably seen the press. NHS dentistry is really struggling. access is a massive problem. You're not alone in looking for a dentist. Unfortunately, we cannot see you under the NHS, but let me talk to you about ways that we can look after you, because we'd love to be able to help you, and get you out of pain or whatever, and have that conversation. If the patient is going to go private, who are they going to pick? You or one of those other 25 that said, no, you can go on a waiting list? It's obvious, you won't win them all by any stretch, but you're definitely positioning yourself to hopefully win 20 or 30% of those people that inquire and convince them to become a private patient in the practice. If you've got somebody who's ringing you up because they've been awake for 3 nights with raging toothache, I promise you, finding £150 for them to be seen as an emergency will all of a sudden become much easier, because getting out of pain is more important now than finding an NHS space. And I just need somebody to talk to me about private dentistry isn't the thousands of pounds that I think it's going to be.
Matt, that was fantastic. Like, honestly, one of the best ways of, because we come across that problem all the time, and I'm going to ask you the next question: how do you implement that? But yeah, it's incredible how quickly a receptionist will shut that conversation down.
Yeah,
because they assume they're a tire kicker or they're a time waster. Now, you could argue that yes, maybe 5 years ago that was the case, and you should never really treat someone like that anyway. But now, like you say, like they can't go anywhere else. So why not spend a bit more time to try and understand them, understand their problem, and you're not going to convert everyone. There's obviously a diehard group of people out there that they must have NHS. It's their right to have NHS treatment. It's you're taking everyone's money by being private, but there are a few people that will I think don't make you can't assume that they can't afford it.
And
it's just what they're used to.
More people than you think can afford private dentistry. It's just that an unfortunate reality that we must accept is that the general public do not value dentistry as much as they value Starbucks coffee and Tesco meal deals. And that's a reality of life. But if we can help them understand that actually the amount of money that they really need to be putting aside on a regular basis is actually quite negligible in order to look after themselves privately from their dental needs point of view, then more people than ever will all of a sudden come around to that realization. I mean, if you think back 25 years ago, everybody had eye tests and glasses under the NHS. That was a standard offering. And then slowly, over time, the NHS said, we can't keep ploughing money into optics. We just haven't got the money. We'll keep the secondary services going that are needed for, more in-depth investigations and treating problems. But actually, if people need eye tests, that needs to come down to them or a deal they get with their employer. And we'll look after people that really can't afford it or children. And now none of us, people say it's my right to have NHS dentistry. Well, my question to them is, do you wear NHS specs? Because you definitely don't. None of us do. And dentistry is the same for me. I mean, we know that the whole of the NHS is so heavily underfunded. So for me, you've got children with leukemia, you've got people who are suicidal with mental health, and then you've got teeth. If anybody ever believes that teeth should be the priority, then they need to re-ask themselves where would they align their priority if they've got a dying child and somebody who's suicidal in front of them. Absolutely, putting a filling in a tooth is not going to win that argument. And I think that's just what we really need to understand, that we can sit here and bang our chests all we want about looking after people's teeth and prevention is better than cure, but I'm sure that many opticians did that 30 years ago, and lo and behold, they're all running very successful private businesses now, and dentists can definitely do the same.
Yeah, man, that's a really great way of looking at it. I'm not sure how someone would take that on the if they're looking for an NHS presence.
Please don't say that.
I don't never say that to a patient. But it's a great way of just painting the picture of for practice owners, like where it's going to get to. It might be a struggle now, but eventually it'll just be like the norm, and we'll look back and just be like, oh, remember that time when we had had to try and force people in. So I can imagine that your conversion rate, if you answer the phone, would be pretty high, right? You've obviously got, obviously you know how to talk to people. You understand like the psychology as well. And obviously, I'd probably say it would be a similar situation if the practice owner answered the phone. But how do you get someone like the receptionist team to kind of care the same amount or put the same effort into trying to convert that inquiry into a private patient? Because I guess that's where it might fall down sometimes, the person who answers
So
it.
I think getting your practice team on board is really, really important. And it comes down to a couple of things. One is you really need to scrutinize people that you're recruiting into your practice team. And I think it can feel all too easy that, oh, it's too difficult to find people and we'll just take whatever comes along. And that definitely isn't the right approach, because you need to be sure that the people that you've got working for you marry into the values of you as the owner, your manager, what you're trying to, the ethos of your business, the real crux of what is going on and why you exist as a business in the first place. If you haven't got people who truly are on the bus with you, it's never really going to work. And I think the other thing that's really important is that you do invest into training your team. So it's all very well saying, oh, we'll do an induction and we'll give you some crib sheets, but front desk, the people that work at the front desk who are unfortunately tarred with this receptionist title, which for me is absolutely not what they are. In my practice, they were called front desk professionals. I refer to them wherever I go as a front desk team. I just feel receptionist really waters down what their role is about. You want to invest time in them, in understanding not clinical dentistry, but just understanding how to talk in a really nice patient-focused way that is caring, that draws that focus back to their health, and keeps it going. And we, when I was in practice, we had consultants that came in. We used Emma John, we had Sheila Scott. I mean, neither of those are any longer working as consultants, but it's worth making that investment, a couple of £1,000, a really good training day where you can get that team on, you can just get together and get to understand one another and what are each other's strengths, because not every receptionist is going to be this die-hard salesperson. So if that's not them, then is there a way you can strike up a balance that you've got somebody who's better off answering the phone and somebody who's better off checking patients in and booking appointments? Receptionists can have, your front desk team can have different roles. They don't all need to be doing everything all of the time. So I think that's really important. The other thing I would say is making sure people have guidelines about what to do and what to say. Now, I absolutely do not mean give them a script, because if you give somebody a piece of paper with a script on, regardless of what anybody else will tell you, that becomes the most impersonal conversation that you ever have, because that script means you feel like you're somebody at Sky Television reading from a computer screen, line by line, and it just feels totally watered down. You need people to put their own personality into the conversation, because people buy from people that they like, and they can't possibly get to know somebody on the phone if they're just reading from a bit of paper. But they should have bullet points or questions on a piece of paper to navigate that conversation and be able to pull it back. So, for example, for me, my front desk, when they had a new inquiry, had questions about making sure that they got the patient's name, they got a phone number, they got an email address, they understood how they'd heard about the practice, they found out what their reason was for calling today, just so as we had a bit of history about that patient. And by gathering contact details, like an email or a phone number, we could send them, a little bit of a welcome email. We could send them a text with an appointment reminder on. We could gather the rest of the information once they were in the building, but we needed to do stuff that made it feel personal and like we cared about that person. And we hadn't just booked them an appointment and forgotten about them. Actually, you bothered to send me an email and tell me how to find the practice and give me a bio about my dentist and, just make it feel nice.
Yeah, awesome, man. I love that. And I think you've sort of struck a nail on the head there, is just show that you care, because you probably do, but just try and demonstrate that. And
yeah,
people want to feel like they care. You are healthcare at the end of the day. But no, that's awesome, Matt. So really good points. And I think I think more practices need to help their front of house teams with those conversations. I think it's just not enough done. And so the next thing is, so how does a plan help with this conversion? You've already touched on the fact that, like putting a little bit away each time. Obviously, just elaborate on that, and like maybe actually go back to basics. Like what is a plan before we go any further?
So a dental plan ultimately is giving the patient the ability to budget for their appointments. So like I said earlier on, dentistry is not a priority to most people. So if they're left to their own devices, they don't budget properly, means they don't come back regularly. You see them as and when they think about it, and it's not the best way to look after somebody. We know in dentistry, prevention is better than cure. We want people back in the chair on a regular basis. So if they have got a problem, we find it early, we treat it quickly, we reduce that risk of invasive treatment moving forward. So when you're coming away from the NHS and you're having to start to ask people to pay for appointments, a big barrier is finance, because if I need 120 quid to see the dentist and the hygienist today, every pay-as-you-go patient makes an appointment in 6 months with every good intention, but you send the text reminder a week before, they'd forgotten about it. Now they haven't got that money in the bank because it's Christmas, it's their mum's birthday, they're taking their kids out for the day, they're going on holiday, something else has consumed that money, and they haven't been putting money away each month to be prepared for the appointment cost. So that then means the 6-month recall actually happens month 9, month 10, month 11, or even beyond that. So all of a sudden, you've now got much bigger intervals between seeing the patient. So I think what the pandemic showed us was that even the most well-maintained patient came back with much higher needs than they would have had we seen them regularly, because they had this interruption in the pandemic where they went 18 months, 2 years without being seen. And because they weren't being seen regularly, they lost motivation for using TPs at home, using a bit of floss, whatever. And all of a sudden, there's other problems that are developing as a result of that. So what the dental plan does is it takes the cost of the appointment, wipes a little bit of money off, about a tenner a year, nothing much, and divides it by 12. So it says to the patient, we'll help you budget for your appointments, and as a thank you for committing your loyalty to the practice for the year, we'll let you save a little bit of money compared to paying as you go. So it's a really nice way for the practice to then see fixed and predictable income each month from their patient base, and it gives a nice smoothing effect to finances for the business across the year, because money lands month on month and not in the peaks and troughs of pay-as-you-go patients. And what it says to the patient is, we will help you budget on your behalf without you having to think about it. And you can turn up at the right intervals, and you don't need to worry about having the money in your pocket because you'll have paid for them in advance. So, that's a plan in a nutshell.
Fantastic. And I guess that in a sense makes private dentistry more affordable, because it's not in one big lump sum.
Absolutely. It removes that financial barrier of needing 100, 200, whatever, to pay for those appointments at the time they're happening. Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. And so, and I've probably to talk to you about this after, but I'm sort of working with a client at the moment where he's just taken on a very heavy NHS practice. And I've already said to him that you'd probably benefit from a plan. How do you introduce a plan? So if you're mainly NHS, how do you introduce a plan to take the practice to more private?
So you would normally set up 3 or 4 options of a plan. So what you want to do is have different levels of plan to accommodate the varying needs of your patients. So we'd normally say you have a 1 exam, 1 hygiene year, 1 hygiene visit a year plan. Not something that you advertise, but good for clinical discretion for somebody you see who's super clinically fit. You have a 2 exam, 2 hygiene a year. That's your bread and butter plan, really. 6 monthly recalls. 2 exams, 4 hygiene visits a year for people that need to be recalled to the hygienist more regularly, because they've got a heavily staining diet, they're not so motivated, whatever. Generally, those 3 plans are a really good starting point for a practice. So the first thing to say is, don't go introducing hundreds of plans, because that confuses you, your team, your patient. Nobody knows what they're doing, and nothing ever gets anywhere. So keep things as simple as you can to start with. You can always introduce more levels later on if you feel you need them. And then the big thing is making sure your team are on board so they understand who they're talking to and how to talk about it. So for me, there's 2 conversations. There's the in-surgery conversation from the clinician, and then there's the conversation at the front desk. Now, a lot of people will say, we don't have time to talk about a plan in the surgery. You definitely do, and you need to make that time, because if you don't talk to your patient as their clinician about a plan, that patient will not truly buy value from it. And when they get to the front desk, they feel like the receptionist is trying to sell them a plan, as opposed to having a warm conversation with something that's already had the seed set by the dentist around the benefits of joining. So the in-surgery conversation is the health-focused one. It's about, Matt, I want you on a plan because I know it means you come back and see me more often. That means if you have any problems, I can find them earlier, treat them quicker, and as a result, I keep you as healthy as I possibly can. Now, if as a dentist you said that to a patient, there aren't going to be many patients that say, I don't want to know any more about this, because they're hearing straight away that really health-focused message about how you want to care for them in the very best way. Once they say yes, they go to the front desk, and the receptionist there can then say, okay, Matt, so let me tell you about the plan. This is what it costs. This is what it includes, and this is how we get you signed up. So the receptionist can deal with all the logistics and all the ins and outs and all finer details, but the dentist needs to give that endorsement. So I think when you're introducing a plan, keep it simple. Make sure you get the conversations right, both in surgery and at the front desk, and then think about who you're targeting. So an NHS practice probably isn't accepting new patients. So I'd be talking to all those new inquiries about how a plan is an affordable way to be seen independently. Make sure those inquiries know that you can look after them, albeit on an independent basis. And then I would be looking at your existing patient base. Have we got odd private patients that are coming in pay as you go that we could get on a plan? But also, let's look at my NHS list. Have I got patients who routinely upgrade to private treatment because they don't want amalgam fillings, they don't want silver crowns, they wanted some composite bonding on their front teeth and they couldn't have that done under the NHS? Have I got patients who go to the hygienist privately, religiously anyway, because they can't get hygiene on the NHS? Those people you want to be highlighting on your day lists and saying, we need to talk to these people next time they're in the surgery, because the only thing they pay for under the NHS is their checkup. So why they're clearly not that committed to the NHS. So can I get them to see me on a completely private basis? There's definitely quick wins to be had with an existing NHS patient base.
Fantastic. I love that, because I was about to ask you, if how do you approach someone who is like NHS through and through, and they're you say to me, I have to be on a plan, and I'm like, well, I'm quite happy being NHS, seeing the NHS. How do you turn around to them and say, well, actually, we're reducing the amount of NHS we get, and actually the only way you can stay with us is a plan? How do you have that conversation?
So I think what you need to be doing when you're trying to talk to people to convert them away from the NHS is make sure they understand the big differentiators. So the first thing I would say is, and what we're seeing more and more of now, is that the NHS bang this drum about there's no such thing as patient registration. So once you close a course of treatment, you have no obligation to see that patient ever again. And they're also saying that you should review your recall procedures to try and recall patients less frequently to make more access for more patients. So instead of recalling patients every 6 months, move to recalling them every 12, 18, 24 months. Now, I know that the guidelines say you need to recall somebody every 12 months from an oral cancer screening point of view, but what the NHS argue is that doesn't need to be a dentist. So actually, you could be recalling your patient once every 2 years for a clinical exam and asking them to go to the hygienist privately once every 6 months, and the hygienist can do their oral cancer screening. So that's where I would then be saying to the NHS patient, look, if you come and see me privately, it does mean that I can see you every 6 months, which is what you've been used to. It's the way we've looked after you up to now. Unfortunately, that's just not the way the NHS is going, because it's having to try and make more access and prioritise people that are in pain or that haven't seen a dentist for a long time. So if you want to stay in the NHS, you can, but you're going to see me far less frequently than you used to. I would also talk about, I can give you a wider variety of treatments as standard. So, we, rather than have to talk about NHS and private options, we can just talk about the plethora of options that will be available to you should you need any treatment on a private basis. And I think, it's just about making sure that you marry up those shortfalls in the NHS. You're used to seeing me. If you want to continue to come here under the NHS, it might be that we just have to slot you into a diary where there is availability, because we're all going to be very busy. But if you register on a plan with me, or you register with me privately, that does give you guaranteed registration to me as the dentist that you trust. So that way you keep that relationship that you like, you come back and see me at the intervals that you're used to, and we can continue this relationship that we've had this far in. So, I would just tie into, ultimately the messages that the NHS are driving home, which is there is no patient registration, and recall your patients less frequently. We know that's not the right thing to really be doing. So let's tell the patient that there are other options.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome, Matt. I do love that whole, because I hadn't even thought about it. Like you said, the quick wins, like focus on the people that are mainly doing private anyway,
Yeah,
but happen to be doing, which, that's a great, just kind of, work your way down from, I guess, from the easiest, maybe hopefully the easiest to convert, and then save those other challenges, the more
absolutely.
challenging ones for later. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. That's fantastic. Now, you obviously have experience of working in practices.
Mm-hmm.
You have experience of working with dental teams and practice owners from the plan side of things. What would you say was your number one piece of advice for anyone thinking about buying or starting a practice?
So I think it would go back to what I was saying earlier, which is think about what makes you tick from either being a dentist, or, what's driving you to want to own a practice in the first place. So just remember that you do not need to be all things to all people. So, I speak to so many people who say, I just want to be a dentist. I want to be a good general dentist that looks after everybody. And that's a lovely message to have, but it is so vague and widespread and woolly that it's very hard to really create an astounding practice from such a watered down message that doesn't really tie into anything. So just take a step back and spend some time just really doing a bit of discovery of yourself and of where you want to take that practice. Because, I think that's what's really important. And that's definitely what drove me and my business owners when I was in practice, that we took the time to sit down and just talk about who was our ideal patient, who did we want coming in, what treatments did we want to deliver, what was the message we were really trying to drive home to our patients, and to give you an example of that, we ended up with like a drawing of a patient that we created, and we named her, and we knew what she would look like. And that wasn't because we wanted to alienate or ostracize anybody else from the practice, but it was just because we knew that that was the sort of person that was really going to behave and share the values and the views that we had as a business and where we wanted to go. And I think that's definitely what you should be doing. Don't just go in there trying to do everything. If really what makes you tick is, root canal work, spend some time about how can I build relationships with professional colleagues in the areas? How can I get some referrals in to build up a bit of a referral base? Could I go off and do some postgrad courses? You don't need to become a specialist endodontist. There's plenty of people out there with special interests, but could you do something? Could you invest in some equipment that sets you apart from other people? Similarly, you might be into the aesthetic stuff. If that's what you want to do, make sure you're driving the business in the right way. Have you got somebody in who's delivering, botulinum toxin injections and dermal fillers? Have you got somebody that can provide a liner treatment, be it Invisalign, Clear Correct, whatever? Just make sure that you're setting your business up to achieve what you're wanting to do and attract the client base that you want. Just keep it as niche and as narrow as possible, because that will lead you to success, really.
Matt, that is fantastic advice. So good. Have you thought about being a consultant?
I don't think I could deal with the stress. I'm,
Well,
you know,
maybe one day.
I'm more than happy to share my advice with people, but I think for me, plan is where I want to be. I suppose I've been in business a long time, and actually some of the elements of the NHS that I was in, a lot of that was being privatized at the time that I was there. So I've always had to think in a money-making way. I mean, people look at the NHS as this like government-funded body, but really it isn't. Most NHS departments look about how do they top up money through other ways, how do they create income to sustain themselves. So yeah, I guess I've always had that business acumen, really, where I have to think outside the box. And for me, regardless of where I've been, it's always been about how do you find your USP in amongst a whole, cluttered market of people trying to do the same thing as you. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's we also say the same thing. Like you can't just be in a general dental practice. Like you might not like every part of dentistry. So like you say, find the thing that you really like. It might be that you don't like doing endo, so you don't do anything to do with endo and you focus on that. And then you, even though you have like an ideal patient persona, like you said, you can draw a picture and stuff. From a marketing perspective, it's great because just to focus on those people, but that doesn't mean that you're gonna like not resonate with other people. It's we're a dental focused marketing agency. We still get inquiries from non-dentists.
yeah.
Like, and it's in our interest to like whether we turn them down or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly what it was like for us in practice, because our new patients used to see a treatment coordinator before we booked an appointment with the dentist, and that was really not just to allow the patient to come in and experience the practice and make sure it was right for them, but for us to get an understanding of, is this somebody we even want in the building? Are we gonna, and that's where I had that conversation with that chap wanting full mouth crowns. I was able to wheedle him out without him needing to waste any surgery time, because I could just say, we are not going to be the practice for you, because this is not the dentistry that we deliver. And if you get yourself set up right like that, you can have very productive surgeries and be delivering dentistry that you actually enjoy, which has to resonate with most people, I would think, because like you say, everybody has a particular element of clinical dentistry that they enjoy more than others, and you can make it work for you, for sure.
Yeah. And also, you might not even enjoy doing clinical dentistry at all, and that's absolutely fine. You can just step back from that and run a practice without having to do that. I've literally just got off I did a podcast earlier with one of our clients, and he basically brought the practice because he doesn't enjoy necessarily the clinical side of dentistry. He loves dentistry, loves running a business, but doesn't want to be doing that. So he's like, well, he works on the business 5 days a week, which is fantastic. But no, Matt, this has been fantastic. Honestly, really good. Your clients are lucky that not only are they getting, obviously a great plan, but they're actually getting your expertise and knowledge as well. So it'd be amazing to actually, I don't know how we'd figure it out, but like, how do you actually assess the impact you've had on these businesses? Because you're not just helping them with the plan. You're literally probably like completely changing their model, which is amazing.
And that's
the value they get is fantastic.
That's definitely what makes me tick. So I like to go to bed at night and think that I've done something that's truly helped somebody else. And when you sit down, 12 or 18 months into a relationship and somebody says to you, like, thank you, because if it hadn't been for you, we'd still be doing what we were doing before. And you've just transformed things for us. And actually, I've got a better work-life balance, or I'm doing what I wanted to be doing, or I'm spending more time with my children. All the money in the world doesn't replace that level of gratitude. It definitely for me isn't about what I earn. It's about the value that I add to a business, for sure.
That's fantastic, Matt. That's awesome. So if anyone listening would like to reach out and speak to you, what are the easiest ways to do that, Matt?
They can call me on my mobile, they can drop me an email, or they can just go to our patientplandirect.co.uk website. There's functions on there where you can live chat to our client services team. You can send a contact form in for somebody to get back to you. But I think, Mike, will you just share my contact details as a result of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we will. I'll include all the contact methods in the show notes. So if you do want to reach out to Matt, just talk. Clearly, you can tell from this conversation that Matt knows his stuff. He'll be able to help you beyond just implementing a plan. And obviously, very nice guy as well. So awesome, man. Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Honestly, I really appreciate your time, and I'll hopefully see you in and around dentistry.
Yeah, for sure.
Brilliant. Cheers, Matt.
Great. Thanks.